Hello. I would like to share with you today a little bit of the how we got here as far as this group goes. We started this Primordial Home. It's a Mighty Networks group called Primordial Home. And it's really acting as like an anchor to bring people together to share the tenets of my work. And it seems that we need some context for that because, as is most everything we do, it's kind of come together in an unconventional way. So I just want to give you some background on what prompted the creation of the group and give you some important guidelines for what we're creating, some important key features of what we're hoping to create here so that you can see if you feel inspired to participate and then participate to whatever level that inspiration takes you. So firstly, I specifically wanted to share about this initiation of the Immaculate Conception of the Self that I have been exploring in myself and in personal sessions for several years now. I guess it's probably been 2 or 3. And that goes with working in the spinal cord. So I started out being drawn into the spinal cord and noticing the relationship between the essence or the spirit and the embodiment of the tissues and the fluids in the spinal cord. That process of exploring that aspect of the physiology into the source of that physiology, taking us into multiple dimensions of ourselves, leads to phases of opening that lead into what I call the Immaculate Conception of the Self. It's essentially the arising of the self in full awareness outside time that eventually burgeons completely into all of time and all of materiality, into the body, into all the bodies that we've inhabited through time, and brings a coherence that only comes through grounding in the source of what you are. So I've come to the point of sharing that particular initiation, right? But it's taken me lots of years of inner work to be able to even touch in with that territory. The opening up of the spine is based on years of using the fundamentals, let's say. So the next logical thing to do as far as creating a structure to bring people into that space is to introduce those fundamentals. And since my excitement is not in the fundamentals, I called in Fleur specifically and also Sarah to help me do that. Both of them have been working with me for a long time. They have taken the fundamental principles of what I share and really allowed them to flourish within themselves. Really what I do is teach people to come back to themselves continually. So when you come back to yourself and you notice these these fundamental aspects, all of the sensory experience, your physical sensations, emotion, thought, energy movement, and you take the time to listen and explore and just let the experiences of the sensory world be there in acceptance, they start to show things that weren't apparent before. And in the showing, there are various levels of awakening, right? Including into the awakening of what is being shown, or what's having the experience of the sensory world, and what that is in relationship to the non-sensory, or what's silent and still. So silence and stillness, the experience of a me or an I, and the sensory experience, those are all fundamental aspects of every single person in existence. So all I'm doing is pointing people back to that within themselves, right? All I'm doing, all we're doing. So once you tune into those elements, then there's a way that appears that is continually being shown through the movement or the lack of movement of those elements and the investigation of them. And that is what I'm sharing. That's what the people that I've asked to help me have done for so long that it's now an inherent aspect of what they are. And in that way, they can share with you from the place of having integrated the principles behind what we're doing. And I feel very good about that. So, one of the things that we're not doing, or it feels helpful for me to talk about what we're not doing, just so people can get a sense of the nature of the simplicity and innocence of what we're sharing. So we're not creating an organization, and that includes, like, it's not a spiritual organization, and it's not a business organization. We're not like marketing or monetizing spirituality in a way that is creating an empire. We're not trying to, this is not a conquest, we're not trying to conquer you or anybody. So I can see the intelligence behind that, because I've noticed that every time the wisdom of deep, simple, and also nuanced spiritual teachings are organized or come together into an organization, let's say, it seems to me like trouble happens from there. So I'm thinking of Osho, who I greatly admire as a teacher, and he created an organization of sannyasins, and eventually had community, I think it was in Oregon, had a very large community where everybody was living together, and he was the head of the organization, and then he had different levels within the hierarchy, like a secretary and I don't know the full details of it, but that whole thing kind of collapsed and crashed, which you can see in the movie that came out about him a couple of years ago. And for me, it's a real taking away of just the practicality and the availability of what's there now all the time. So I have an interest in preserving that, and I have no energy to extrapolate from that by going on to create organizations and hierarchies and so on. I have done a lot of trainings, healing trainings, and I've worked with teachers that I would put in the shamanic realm as well. And one thing that you've probably noticed too, you know, if you go to do a training, like a healer training, you'll come out with a certificate, or they might have an organization that has these main principles, and then they teach their teachers to teach those principles, and the principles are maybe trademarked, or like the techniques are trademarked, and the teachers get certified, and maybe you go through the course and you get certified that none of that is being created here. It's really the goal of what we're doing is to create the most ease and the least paperwork and fodder that's separating you from the actuality of the internal process that wants to unfold. So our goal is to facilitate that the best that we can, and that's why we're here. That's why we're here. Now there are costs. There's time put in, you know, so there is like an exchange of money that goes with that. But really the call is to keep it as simple and accessible as possible. And so that each person can tune into the simplicity of what we're sharing, make it their own, and then offer that in service to the world. That's why it's important to me not to have trademarks or proprietary things, because all we're offering is what is available to everybody anyway. So I love it when someone comes to learn with one of us and then turns that around and starts to combine what they have learned with their own healing technique, for example, or the way that they write, or if they want to share with other people, getting in touch with stillness, you know, that's all. I want that to be easily accessible. And that takes me into another point that feels valuable and related. And that is, I have some people come to me with concerns about variation in the expression of who we are. So normally, if you're working within a group of people that have the same focus, and you know, it could be like a healing organization or tribe or whatever, then you kind of notice that there's a consistency of material, of information, and we don't necessarily have the consistency at the material level. And I'll give you an example of how this looks on a practical way. So once I explain more, what is consistent is that we're all tapping into fundamental principles of nature, and those fundamental principles combine in coherent ways to create something unique within all of us. And it is that uniqueness that is the signature of the unification of the underlying principles. So I have people who worked with me for years, and they might come to me and say, I'm troubled because I don't agree with the way that you share on social media about medical freedom, or in this case, informed consent around vaccination, for example, which is one of the passions that I have and I feel strongly about speaking out into the world about human rights in that regard. So that's important to me. And it's a part of the refinement of my own unique expression. But people close to me can say, I don't agree with that. Or I might have a different view on it, or it's not important to me. And I say, great, let's celebrate and honor our differences and our variations. I have people like Sarah who is assisting in this group and helping to guide people in the basic materials. She's really interested in twin flames, for example. And there's a whole rich inquiry for her and a drive around the investigation of that. And that's amazing. I feel like that's what she needs to be doing. And the work that we do together feeds that. It's kind of like we're all sitting at the foundation. That's why it's called Primordial Home. We're sitting like in the primordial soup. And then as each one of us birth out of that primordial soup, there's a different phenomenon, and it's so refined that you can clearly see the variation in our expression. Yeah, I have people who are lots of healers, of course, that take what we're doing and bring it into their healing modality in order to improve the efficacy and bring simplicity to what they're doing. I have people who are passionate about parenting, about midwifery, and being a doula. Fleur, that's Fleur's focus, one of her focuses. So I feel like it's important to make that clear because of the concerns I've had, the feedback that I've had show me that that's something that people ask about a lot. Yeah, back to one of the things that we're not. So I'm often in this inquiry around spiritual teacher, because how I show up in the world, people often put that label on top of me. And it can cause me some agitation. So it's very important because, when you're grounding in the fundamental principles of nature, it always brings self-empowerment. It always brings self-empowerment. And when there are points of lack of self-empowerment, then it's a clue to come back to ourselves. So people, organizations, teachers, healers, whatever, that have a dynamic, whether subtle or not so subtle, of I am the authority and the students are under that authority. We're outside that paradigm. For us, we're all I don't want to say on the same level, but we all have the same regard. We are on the same level in that there is no one having authority over anyone else. And yet, of course, there are variations in wisdom that bring expression into roles as a guide, for example, because of just the work that we've done and the experience that we have that can bring wisdom into a role like that. So there is an honoring of that is embedded within us, and yet we will always ask you to come back to yourself. But that's part of what we're sharing here. Yeah, so the original intent of the group was just to create a place where I could walk with people into the places that I've discovered. Not just the places, but the place that's been alive for me now. And so I'm really glad that Fleur, and then also with Sarah helping, are creating a space to ground into the fundamentals that are important within that later initiation. And that's basically what we're doing. That's what this group is about. I'm just wondering if I missed anything. I noticed, the way that we created the group was we created it before like certain important foundations were in place. So this is one of the foundations that I'm hoping to offer you to give you some context for what we're creating. Let me just see if there's anything else I want to say. Yeah. There is another thing I want to say that someone asked in the group, and that is that along with the no hierarchy of people, let's say, there's also, in a way, no hierarchy of information. So, which is a little bit paradoxical to what I said before, because I want to walk with people in this particular place that's alive for me now. I want to bring them there, and you need to have foundations before that will come into complete fruition. But as I've noticed on the spiritual path, things don't happen necessarily in a linear way. The levels of this initiation that I'm in now are the clearest and the most effulgent that they've ever been. But I've been touching on it, sometimes when I'm sitting there, I think, I remember when I was a kid, I was here touching in to this place. So it's not like it happened in linear time. And that's the nature also of the unfolding that the group setup is exemplifying. So I have people who've worked with me for a long time, and they've touched this space, and they haven't even necessarily had like a structured exposure to the basic material. So the group is going to serve in that way. Those people now have a chance to have a place to investigate that fundamental, like basic material in a way that's useful, that brings more understanding, conceptual understanding, and practical skill, in the inner terrain. So in that way, there is this possibility to kind of like start with the basics and then move to the intermediate and then go into the more advanced. But on the other hand, you can also work with any of us individually and move sometimes in one session from like advanced, basic, intermediate, basic, advanced. It's not a linear process, and that shows through just how the inner space leads us as we go. It's very feminine in the revealing. So it's my wish too that we're leaving leeway in the group to explore things kind of in order or out of order, as we feel inspired to do that. So there's the group in which we'll ground all these things. You can work with any of us individually. And then we're also, all three of us, doing projects that are outside of this group that you're welcome to participate in. And in that way, this is beautiful patchwork that creates this quilt, for you to touch in here and there and wherever you feel, and your inspiration is what's guiding. And if you want to go, obviously, if you are doing other healing modalities at the same time, or, all of that is encouraged. There is no place where what we're doing is excluded. That takes me to another point is I hear some people share with me what you're doing is nice, but I feel a distinction between this and that. For example, like, oh, I'm not gonna do your thing because it doesn't quite, it's not this other thing. And I mean, I honor that. That's great. That's fine. I feel it's important for people to have discrimination and make those choices. And I want to point out that what we're doing is applicable to everything, everywhere, in every moment. So it's applicable to when you're brushing your teeth. It's applicable to when you're having a fight with your partner. It's applicable to all the healing modalities, to all the spiritual techniques, to all the mundane things. Like I have people who are like working in IT, you know, that's their job, and they bring what they cultivate within themselves into their job. You know, it's applicable everywhere. So that's another important thing for me to share. Yeah. We really appreciate your participation, and you're also welcome to just read and not say anything explicitly. Each time you participate, you're really feeding the guides, the facilitators, and the nurturing of the group. You're feeding yourself, hopefully, in the expression of an internal process that you may have been inspired into through some of the material in the group. And you're feeding other people who are reading your comment, whether they are engaging with that or not. So all of that is really useful. And as we go and as we start to do things like offer more structured coursework or material and create groups where people can relate together through those meditations and through the sharings, it's we're feeding ourselves and growing together and making it exponential. So I look forward to that. I'm really excited to be able to do that with you all. And thank you for being here.